distinguished career in public service goes back to 1973 when he served our country in the United States Army Reserves, and he did that for 13 years. He then continued to serve the public throughout his professional life in many different capacities, including as a United States Senator and the Attorney General for Alabama. But perhaps most important for us and those of us in this building and to our law enforcement colleagues gathered here today is that before he became United States Senator and Attorney General of Alabama, he was, and ultimately the Attorney General of the United States. He served for many years as an Assistant United States Attorney and as a United States Attorney. So he understands and has served in the front lines of federal law enforcement, and he understands the challenges and the incredible privilege that it is to be a part of the mission to keep our communities and our country safe and free from violence and crime. So it is my privilege this morning to introduce to you today the 84th Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions.
Thank you all. It is good to be with you, and thank you, Jen, for the work that you've been doing for justice in America and for this district. You have a tremendous team, and the Southern District of New York is a great district. It has tremendous pride, professionalism, skill, determination, independence, they say, and we appreciate that. It used to make me feel bad since I was a Southern District of Alabama, and they would say the Southern District, but you are the Southern District, and I appreciate that and the leadership that you've done. And I remember visiting Rudy Giuliani here when he was my supervisor. He was associate. In those days, the associate in the early 1980s had the criminal division and the U.S. attorneys. And actually, I'm telling you, Rudy was there when some of the great changes occurred in law enforcement that were different than anything since the founding of the Republic, and it evolved into honesty in sentencing, sentencing guidelines, minimum mandatories, no bail on appeal, pretrial detention. All of those things happened in the mid-'80s, and it changed law enforcement entirely. I want to particularly, June, express my commendation for your efforts on the Peter Gotti case and the kind of cases that have always been made here in this district. That's important work. We planned this trip a couple of weeks ago, I guess, for the purpose of talking about national security. It's a big issue for America. We've got some key legislative battles that are out there we need to get done and have the right result on. And we, of course, had no idea what would happen Tuesday. But it's a really dramatic definition of what we need to do and why what we're doing is so important. And I want to first offer my condolences to the families of the victims, those who've been injured, and to the people of New York for the losses that occurred Tuesday. We express our deepest sympathy for that. To the families and friends, we say we are going to bring anyone that was involved in that, the perpetrator, to justice. I know you'll be committed to that, and so will the Department of Justice. This latest tragedy showed, once again, the bravery of the police officers that serve us every day. In particular, of course, I want to mention Officer Ryan Nash of the 1st Precinct. His quick response, courageous action under pressure prevented the attack from getting worse. He's rightly regarded as a hero today, not just in New York, but across America. He symbolizes the best in law enforcement. I remember at the Capitol a number of years ago, I saw a young officer just racing past me, and there was a shooting outside the Capitol. He didn't know what was out there. Could have been a gang of terrorists with automatic weapons and things. He was going to the fight. That's what our law enforcement officers do. We need to validate them, we need to affirm them, and we need to, if someone in a department does wrong, they need to be punished, but we need to affirm officers who serve us every day, put their lives on the line for us. This morning, I attended the roll call with officers from the 13th Precinct, some of whom responded to the 9/11 attacks. It was an honor for me to meet with them. They embody the highest ideals of law enforcement and public service. And the people of New York should know that they have one of the finest law enforcement institutions in the country, maybe the finest. I certainly was more impressed after leaving today than I was when I came. We know, those of you in the federal government know, that 85% of law officers serve at the state and local level. This administration cannot succeed in our goal of reducing crime without our state and local partners. We're all in it together. The president, New Yorker, law and order president, and he's serious about it, gave us 3 orders. One was to back the men and women in blue. And we take that seriously. I hope you will take that seriously, because these are the frontline folks that make us safe. The second order was crack down and dismantle transnational criminal organizations, ISIS, gangs, cartels, terrorists. Those are high priorities always for the federal government, our federal prosecutors, and I know you'll focus on that. And thirdly, we got a directive, an order from the president, simply to reduce crime in America. New York is reducing crime. America, the crime is going up way too fast. I've seen it. I observed it. When I started as a young prosecutor in the 70s, crime was going up every year. We began to turn the tide in the 80s with the new reforms in criminal justice that I mentioned, and it began to pay fruition in the 90s and into the 2000s, but we've seen some changes nationally. Murder went up in 2015, 12%, according to the FBI data, and homicide was up another 8% in 16. 20% increase nationwide in homicide. The 12% increase was the largest increase in homicide nationally since 1968. So I'm worried about that. And I take the president's charge seriously. We embrace that charge. We as federal officials need to be working with our state and locals to see if we can't reverse that trend. And the most important thing I think I learned today was a reaffirmation, friends, that if we do the right policies, we can impact crime. This is just a stunning development, how much New York has brought down certain violent crime incidents in this city, 3/4 maybe. And if we can do that, and they believe we can nationwide, we can begin to see us head in the right directions. So this week's deadly incident, the deadliest attack in New York since 9/11, is another reminder of the dangerous threats we face from radical Islamic terrorism and the kind of threats we're seeing nationwide. New Yorkers know firsthand that terrorists want nothing more than to take away our most basic rights, the right to be safe, the most fundamental right. They aim to diminish our freedom and to constrict our lifestyles. And if it weren't for our troops, our intelligence community, and our law enforcement, the terrorists would be succeeding. Since 9/11, the Department of Justice has made fighting terrorism its top priority. Our goal is not to just catch terrorists, but to prevent them from striking us. That was the entire discussion after 9/11 in the Judiciary Committee and the Armed Services Committee, both of which I was a member. And that's what we talked about, and we do not want to forget that principle. And this fight against terrorism, we have gotten results. We have made progress. People in this room and around the country have made us safer. 3 days a week, I meet with the FBI, and we talk about terrorism and threats to our countries. That's the focus of it, the classified briefing. I got to say that I have been amazed how effective our federal investigative agencies have been in preventing attacks. But if you look at it mathematically, you can see that we can't possibly identify all the attacks in advance and stop them from occurring. Things that happened Tuesday. That's very, very difficult to do, but we have interdicted quite a number and made quite a good success on it. So we've got to be careful to maintain our success and not have any thing occur that could undermine that effectiveness. So last month, let me just would share some cases with you. A federal grand jury convicted Ahmad Rahimi for his role in the September 2016 Chelsea, New York City bombing. To the assistant attorneys who worked on this case, Emil Bove, is he here? Is he good? Andrew DeFilippis and Sean Crowley, and our federal and local law enforcement officers, thank you for your great work in that case. This department is proud of you. Also in October, the Department of Justice unsealed charges against 3 men plotting to carry out an ISIS-inspired terrorist attack in this city. These cases are being prosecuted by attorneys in the Southern District. And just this week, Mustafa Ayman al-Ayman, a Libyan national, charged with participating in the 2012 Benghazi attacks. That was a great effort to put that together. He was apprehended overseas and is on his way to America to face justice. Terrorists should know this. This administration will use all lawful tools at our disposal, including prosecution in Article III courts or at Guantanamo Bay. If anyone has any doubt about it, they can ask the more than 500 criminals whom the Department of Justice has convicted of terrorism-related offenses since 9/11. And they can ask the dozens of enemy combatants at Guantanamo. So we're not slowing down. The FBI currently has ongoing terrorism-related investigations in all 50 states. And let me assure you that the President Trump, and we've talked about it, I've talked with him personally about it, has not forgotten 9/11. As a New Yorker, he knew people who lost their lives that day. He has made our national security his top priority. He is exactly right to do so. As he put it, the battle with terrorism is, quote, a battle between good and evil. And he said we need to be smart, vigilant, and tough. So over the next few minutes, I want to take this occasion to discuss some of the priority initiatives necessary if we are to be smart, vigilant, and tough. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the most important things that are before us right now. And this is not a political or ideological matter. It's a public safety, a national security matter. It's about what a great nation must do, should do, has to do to protect itself. First, we need to keep potentially dangerous people from getting into the country. Second, we need access to electronic evidence with court approval. And third, we need to lawfully, aggressively surveil non-citizen terrorists overseas, all of which we can do, are doing, and we need to be more effective at it, and we don't need to have those abilities constricted legislatively. The President is determined to keep terrorists and their sympathizers from infiltrating the country. Mathematically, just imagine large numbers that come in and fall upon the FBI and other agencies to try to monitor. We've just got to be careful about that. We cannot bring in people who are dangerous. The President knows since 9/11, most of those convicted in our courts for international terrorism-related crimes have been foreign-born. The department currently has ongoing terrorism-related investigations against hundreds of people who came here as refugees. As you all know, we expend enormous manpower and resources on these investigations, as well as on the hundreds of domestic cases that are inspired by foreign terrorists. So the FBI and our officers do heroic work, but it is simply not reasonable to keep asking them for more and more without maintaining and putting in place policies that make it easier for them to be successful and that make us safer. And the president was right to issue his executive order, the travel ban, so-called, to ensure proper vetting. We're going to slow down. We identified particularly problematic countries and areas of the globe where terrorists are nested, and we don't have any support from local government to actually do an effective vetting. And these are countries that have failed to properly carry out their business so that we can have records and documents to know who people are. So how do you vet people from North Korea? How do you vet people from Syria when there's a war going on and violence, and nobody is going to check the criminal records of individuals who apply to come here? So the president has a legal right to take this action. Congress has authorized the president to completely stop travel from certain countries if it would be detrimental to the national interest. That's exactly what the president did, and he did it to keep us safe. A small number of dangerous countries where some of these terrorist groups are nested. We are proud of your office and others who have defended these orders. There's been some negative adverse district court cases, but already the Supreme Court has indicated and stopped some of these injunctions in a very significant, even a majority of the injunctions now are in force, and we're continuing to proceed in an effective way. And I look forward to a victory in the Supreme Court. I believe these orders are legitimate. It's vested in the President of the United States, the responsibility to defend us. He is entitled to make judgment decisions, not courts. The CIA reports to him. The Department of Defense reports to him. The State Department, the FBI, and it's his responsibility. It's a commitment he made to the American people. Any president makes to the American people. So I think this is lawful and proper. We need to get that done. The president's goal and direction and policy was to implement more rigorous, more effective vetting processes. He called it extreme vetting. That's a way to communicate. People understood what he was talking about. And he made these decisions because we continue, as you know, to face grave security threats. And he is not afraid to talk about it directly and boldly. Further, the president's separate action to reduce the flow of refugees into our country will reduce the likelihood of potentially dangerous people getting here. We're going to take more care on this. It will also take some of the pressure off the FBI and our local law enforcement by controlling and vetting better, more carefully, those requesting entry before they are admitted to our country. The president has also laid out a set of principles on immigration reform that will make us safer. First of all, by building the border wall there, and which impacts drugs as well as crime, and requiring legal status to get a job. And this plan would dramatically cut down on illegality in our system, and it would help us keep better track of who've entered the country. And just as importantly, the plan would switch us to a merit-based immigration system. He would abolish the diversity visa lottery, replace something I have advocated for over a decade, which I think makes no sense, and to replace it with a point-based system like is used in Canada and Australia. This is the best way to ensure our system is benefiting America, which it should do. We don't use random chance in college admissions, and we don't roll a die to hire people By the same token, a lottery tells us nothing about who might be entering our country. So a merit-based system would be a boon to our economy and our wages. Of that I have no doubt, but it's not just an issue of economic security. It's an issue of national security. A merit-based system, by definition, would be safer than a lottery or even an extended family-based system. So we want the best and brightest in America. The President's plan is essential to protecting our national security while banning drunk drivers, fraudsters, gang members, and child abusers. So a bill to switch to a merit-based system has been introduced in Congress by Senator Tom Cotton and David Perdue. It's called the RAISE Act. I think it would take us in the right direction and help our national security. We need to be aware that some people who come here radicalize after they come here. Just yesterday, the department unsealed an indictment of a Turkish man who was living as a legal permanent resident in New York. He left the United States to join ISIS and then used social media to recruit people in the United States, Europe, and Australia to join in the campaign of terrorism and hate. According to the indictment, the defendant allegedly urged on a suicide bomber in Iraq, and he boasted that he had sent 20,000 jihadists to ISIS territory. Today, he's facing a potential life sentence. The largest category of counterterrorism cases in the United States under investigation today are of people who were inspired by ISIS. Since President Trump took office, ISIS has been on the run in Syria and Iraq. General Mattis and his team have done a very, very effective job. At one point, ISIS controlled a landmass the size of Great Britain and a population the size of Michigan. But now their capital has fallen and they are on the run. We've done it with a minimum of U.S. forces on the ground, and it's taken some time, but I think it's been proven to be a very effective strategy. Very proud to see what's occurred there. We simply cannot have ISIS dedicated to the destruction of America and what we hold dear, holding a nation state somewhere in the world from which they can launch attacks on us. It's a matter of big importance. The number of Americans traveling to join ISIS has declined dramatically. It's not a winning cause. They're on the run. It's not something that I think should be very attractive to anybody who's subject to those kind of possible choices. But terrorist networks are becoming increasingly decentralized, harder to track. Terrorist groups increasingly use social networking sites to recruit new members and lone wolf attackers around the globe. They can use encrypted communication channels to plan their crimes, some of which can be carried out with a matter of hours. The Department of Justice recognizes that terrorist tactics are evolving, and we are adapting our own tactics to meet the challenge. We can never stand still. In this kind of world, they will adjust, and we must adjust too. Which brings us to the second point. To investigate terrorism, we will need access to electronic evidence that lawfully we can obtain. Too often, technology companies have not cooperated with law enforcement or even to comply with court orders sometimes. Over just the past year, the FBI was unable to open access to nearly 7,500 mobile devices that were submitted to their computer analytics response team for evaluation, even though there were court orders and legal authority to do so. That's the technological difficulty we're facing. We can only imagine what the consequences of not getting that information could have been. We know, for example, that terrorists who targeted an event in Garland, Texas in 2015 sent more than 100 instant messages to a terrorist overseas just on the morning of the attack. What we don't know, however, is what he said, because those messages are encrypted. This failure to get encrypted information in a timely manner causes law enforcement to waste even more valuable time and resources, and it could have potentially deadly consequences. A third item that our counterterrorism efforts need is a related matter. It's the ability to surveil overseas for intelligence purposes, something we've been doing steadily for decades, I guess, since the ability to surveil ever developed. Our legal ability to do this has never been seriously challenged. The Fourth Amendment does not apply to non-citizens abroad. It's just that simple. But the law that authorizes us to do this, Section 702, that effectuates it really, of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, is scheduled to expire in just 59 days. It was put in there with an expiration date to see how it was going and required a reaffirmation. So I'm calling today on Congress to reauthorize Section 702. It is critical to what we do. It is proven effective. In 2009, the FBI stopped Najibullah Zazi, an Afghan national, from executing his plans to bomb the New York City subway system, just a few miles from where we are right now. He made explosive and drove over the George Washington Bridge. But thanks to intelligence lawfully gathered under this law, he was prevented from carrying out the attack. Today, with the international terrorist threat decentralized and increasingly online, it is more important than ever that we have this capability. Frequently, terrorists abroad plotting against this country are in contact with other terrorists in the United States, planning how to conduct their attacks. This is the key to prevention of attacks on our country. We want to stop these terrorist attacks before they occur. So I know that Section 702 has been criticized, but I believe fully, having been involved in the drafting of it, having been involved in the Armed Services Committee where we've discussed it, I believe it's a seriously important matter for the safety of our country. We've got to have our representatives focus on this and get this passed before Christmas occurs. I want to be clear. 702 does not permit the targeting of any American anywhere or even a foreigner who's likely to be in the United States. Served on the Judiciary Committee when this law passed, and I can tell you it was vigorously vetted and scrutinized. We spent hours over every word in it. It passed with nearly 70 votes in the Senate and nearly 300 votes in the House of Representatives. In 2012, Congress reauthorized it with an even larger vote. Both times it was completely bipartisan, and every court that has examined it has found it to be lawful. It is the most closely monitored law in the nation's history. We have judges, we have the IG at the Department of Justice, we have Congress and the President independent evaluations of it, and courts have always upheld it. Terrorists continue to plot against the United States, and there is no sign this threat is going away. The only question is whether we will be prepared and whether we can stop these attacks. At a time when our enemies are experimenting with new tools and tactics, we cannot unilaterally disarm ourselves. We cannot afford to let this law expire. And so I respectfully, urgently call upon Congress to once again reauthorize this law and ensure that our intelligence community does not lose this tool, and ensure that we don't go backwards in the war against terrorism. In law enforcement, we're always adapting to the challenges of the moment. We're always trying to hit a moving target, but we can get results, and people in this room have proven that. You have done fabulous work. So I'm confident that if we take these steps that I've outlined today, we work with our state and local law enforcement partners, we will rise to meet whatever challenges face us in the future, and we will keep the American people safe as we are charged with the responsibility to do. Thank you all for what you do. God bless you, and I look forward to working together in the future. Take care.